The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's continuing to build. Last week, or maybe it was the week before, I told you Robert Mueller might want to talk to President Donald Trump in the Trump-Russia investigation. Yesterday, I told you, yes, Mueller definitely wants to talk to Trump, and he is now in touch with Donald Trump's legal team to figure out sort of the particulars. And now Donald Trump says he, quote, would love to talk to Robert Mueller, even, maybe surprisingly, under oath. He appeared impromptu yesterday at a press briefing. He was asked about this possible interview with Robert Mueller's Trump-Russia investigation, and here's what he had to say.
Are you going to talk to Mueller?
I'm looking forward to it, actually.
You want to? Do you have a date set?
Here's the story, just so you understand. There's
Mr.
been no
President?
collusion whatsoever. There's no obstruction whatsoever. And I'm looking forward to it. I do worry when I look at all of the things that you people don't report about with what's happening. If you take a look at, you know, the 5 months worth of missing texts, that's a lot of missing texts. And as I said yesterday, that's prime time. So you do sort of look at that and say, what's going on? You do look at certain texts where they talk about insurance policies or insurance, where they say the kinds of things they're saying. You got to be concerned. But I would love to do that. I'd like to do it as soon as possible.
When will you
Good
do
luck,
it, Mr.
everybody.
President?
He would love to do it, and as soon as possible. And what about under oath? He would do under oath as well. Take a listen to this.
I have to say, subject to my lawyers and all of that, but I would love to do it.
Would you do it under oath, Mr. President?
You mean like Hillary did it under? Who said that?
I said that.
Oh.
Did you do it under oath?
Oh, you said it. You did say it. You say a lot. Did Hillary do it under oath?
I have no idea, but I'm not asking.
I think you have an idea.
Do you think
have
it'll
an
be fair
idea?
to you? Do you think you'll
Wait a minute. Wait. Do you not have an idea? Do you really not have an idea?
really don't remember.
I'll give you an idea. She didn't do it under oath, but I would do it under oath. Listen, but I would do it, and you know she didn't do it under oath, right?
She would do it under oath.
If you didn't do it, if you didn't know about Hillary, then you're not much of a reporter.
I think it'd be
So
fair
you're going to do it under oath?
Say it.
to reach a higher standard. You would do it under oath.
Oh, I would do it under oath.
You would,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Do you trust
No,
the
I would do
FBI?
it.
A total chaos in the room, clearly, as you can tell. Straight talker Donald Trump, right? He'll do it. He would love to do it, and he'll do it under oath. Except immediately after this took place, Trump's attorney, Ty Cobb, named after a famous baseball player, started walking it back. None of it is happening, according to Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb said that Trump is ready to meet with them, that he was speaking hurriedly, and that the parameters are actually going to be guided by Trump's legal team, not by what Trump says to reporters off the cuff at one of these impromptu press briefings. So basically, no under oath period if Ty Cobb or any other attorney has a say, and maybe not even a full in-person interview. There are sort of a couple things to keep in mind here, right? First of all, when the president's lawyer is regularly and immediately saying, yeah, that thing the president just said, that's not actually true. We're not going to be doing what the president just said. That's basically saying the president has no idea what he's talking about when he talks about things as specifically as I would love to speak to Mueller and I would do it under oath. I guess he didn't mean that at all. And that's concerning because whenever we hear anything from Trump, we now need to check, I guess, with either Trump's lawyer or Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, or someone else to be told Trump did mean what he said or Trump didn't mean what he said. So that's number one. Secondly, even if this hadn't been walked back immediately by Trump's lawyer, Ty Cobb, Trump saying I would love to testify under oath still has no actual bearing on whether Trump will testify under oath because Trump says stuff all the time. It's a sort of a silly example, but remember when Trump promised that really specifically, we are going to do a press conference, this was back during the campaign, to explain Melania Trump working illegally in the United States when she first came here. He didn't say, at some point we will say more about it. He said, we're going to do a press event and we will tell you exactly what went on with Melania and these allegations that she was in the U.S. working illegally. Just never happened, right? And Trump gets the benefit from promising the thing without ever actually doing the thing. If it never happens, well, there will have been some reason, right? But Trump was willing. Here he says, I would love to speak to Mueller and I would do it under oath. but he can always say, my lawyers actually weren't able to, my lawyers told me not to do it, or I was willing to do it if Mueller gave me the questions ahead of time and he wasn't willing to do that. Trump says it and gets the benefit. And if it doesn't happen, the Trumpists aren't going to hold him to it anyway.
Yeah, that's his way of getting it both ways, I guess. But you could always just fire your lawyers or go against their wishes if you wanted to. It's a question of, who hires whom, right?
If Trump really was determined that the right thing and the moral thing and the best thing was to testify, rather to be interviewed by Robert Mueller and to do it under oath, of course, ultimately the buck stops with Trump, as he has made very clear since he became president of the United States, that everything stops with him. Another example is the tax returns, right? He'll release the tax returns if X happens or if Y happens, and he never did and he never really planned to, but he got a lot of the benefit out of it just from saying he would, because his followers would hear Trump say, look, he's got nothing to hide. He says as soon as X or Y happens, he'll release the tax returns. He would never say that if he had something to hide. And of course, saying you're going to do something doesn't mean you're actually going to do something. Now, I think the most likely scenario with this Mueller interview, I don't know your sense of it, Pat, but I think the most likely scenario is they agree to, not under oath, with Trump's attorney or attorneys sitting there with him, and a lot of, I would have to follow up with you in writing about that to try to get Trump not in a situation where he's going to self-incriminate, which is a major risk if you're Trump's lawyer.
Very favorable conditions, and I'm guessing that you can get that if you're the president, too.
I would think so.
They're probably going to ask for the questions ahead of time.
They will definitely ask, and I hope that they wouldn't get them, right? I mean, it's sort of imperative that you not give Trump the questions ahead of time. This is a criminal investigation, after all, and the last thing you want is really specifically thought out responses. But again, they will use the I don't recall, but I'd be glad to follow up in writing thing, so that later they can just huddle and figure out the least incriminating way to answer a lot of these questions. Timeline, we're still being told 2 to 3 weeks, presumably, before whatever version of this interview is agreed upon by Trump's lawyers and Mueller's team takes place. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know that it's going to be the fireworks that we might imagine it to be, but once you get to the president, this is a big deal. This is no small thing.
Well, yeah, I don't know if it'll be fireworks because Mueller runs a very tight ship,
yes,
and obviously this thing isn't going to be televised, too.
No.
So maybe we'll see some leaks about what happened in that interview, but I'm not expecting fireworks out of it.
I read something about Kushner is hesitating about being interviewed because of the leak of that Fusion GPS transcript. I guess he's saying he didn't like how that ended up being released just unilaterally by Dianne Feinstein. And that's part of why he now, I guess, is refusing to go in. Anyway, it's all spiraling, and we will continue to follow it, and hopefully Trump is interviewed in some format or another sooner than later. Okay, I have good news, pretty good news, I guess I would say. Not the best news, as Trump would say, but pretty good news. It's like pretty good news. We are now within 85 patrons of securing the support we are targeting to release this 12 to 15 part critical thinking miniseries. And the background, as I've explained before, and earlier in the week I gave you an update when we were 100 patrons away, we are working on a 12 to 15 part miniseries, all based on critical thinking. And it's tied to achieving 2,100 patrons on our Patreon donation page, which you can find at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Once we reach 2,100 patrons, this really great mini-series on critical thinking and epistemology will be released. And if you go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, you'll notice under the goals section on the left side of the page that there is a very clear 2,100 patron goal, which when achieved will trigger the release of this. Now, on Monday or Tuesday, I told you that we were 100 patrons away from 2,100. We've continued to chip away at the goal, and we are now within 85 patrons of the 2,100 patron goal. We are continuing to move ahead with pieces of this, but it is a big project. I showed it to you earlier. The really great animated introduction for the Critical Thinking miniseries is effectively done. Our television and online video audience is seeing this again. We talked about the list of topics. We'll talk about premises and arguments, logical fallacies, valid versus sound arguments, implicit versus explicit premises. It's going to be really, really great. And I've talked about, we talk often extemporaneously. I actually use the word extemporaneously, which is an interesting little thing. We've talked extemporaneously about the sort of crisis of lack of critical thinking skills in the United States in schools, students arriving at college lacking what really should be basic skills that start being taught, I would argue, in middle school, if not first year of high school. And so we're not only advocating for that when it comes to education reform, we're also doing something about it ourselves, which is we're putting together a mini-series on some of these basic critical thinking topics. So I think this is going to be absolutely fantastic, Pat.
Yeah.
And we are now only 85 patrons away, and I encourage people in the audience to help get us closer.
We also speak extemporaneously about many of the things that you'll find within this critical thinking mini-series.
Yes,
like,
right.
If we
Logical
identify
fallacies or
straw man argument or red herring or, the difference between something being valid or sound. We talk about all that stuff in
No
passing.
question about it.
This really boils it down into a whole mini-series.
And in fact, during interviews, I will often use these concepts to critique the assertions of the person that I'm interviewing. That might happen later today, for example, in my interview that's upcoming with C. Edmund Wright. But this will be great. So help get us there. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. If you can throw in $1, please do it, because since it's a patron goal, it doesn't matter how much you can contribute. Once we hit the 2,100 patrons, we are there. And I'm very excited about this. I think this will have been, in retrospect, after it happens, one of the best and best produced things
and that's
that
really
we've done.
That's saying something.
That's right, because we produce a lot of really great things on the program. I'm on Reddit and I'm on Twitter. And on Twitter, you can find me at @dpakman or at David Pakman Show. We'll take a break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Crystal Hefner. Crystal, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Membership continues to be the #1 funding source for the program. And also, this is something that was suggested to me yesterday by a viewer. And I am implementing this immediately. Pat, take notes, because this is new David Pakman Show policy. In addition to the new member of the day, we will now have a sustaining member of the day, because I don't want, now that we have people that have been members for almost 8 years, I don't want to just write off the sustaining members. Today's sustaining member of the day is our current longest time member, dating back to April 29 of 2010, almost 8 years, Emuel Vassi. Emuel Vassi, our longest time member, big league. So thanks to Emuel and to Crystal, new and sustaining members.
This is going to be like twice the work now.
It's going to be twice the work.
New and sustaining members
crazy.
every day.
It's crazy. But please join Crystal and join Emuel at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge on Patreon for as little as $1 per month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, this morning I was browsing the David Pakman Show subreddit. It's a place where you can hang out with over 5,000 David Pakman Show viewers and listeners, davidpakman.com/Reddit. A lot of very interesting discussions, including one about a recent article that was written about Dave Rubin, the political chameleon, which actually references me. There's this article that's been written, I forget where, but I tweeted it a few days ago. And it is called Dave Rubin, a Political Chameleon. And it points out that Dave Rubin once was interviewed by David Pakman, not that long ago, and that I gave some very significant pushback to some of Rubin's ideas, and the article alleges that it didn't go particularly well for Dave Rubin.
Really?
This is not my telling of it. This is this journalist's telling of it, and a discussion going on about that on our subreddit. Very, very interesting. Also on the David Pakman Show subreddit, a new liberal talking point has been suggested, and it is to call Republicans soft on taxes. The idea that if you're all about tax breaks for the rich and tax breaks for corporations and cutting estate taxes and all of this nonsense, that you should be branded by the left as being soft on taxes, the way the right likes to talk about people being soft on crime or soft on terror. I think it's a very interesting idea. I just don't know that it'll work. I think that Republicans can pretty easily spin their way out of it.
It's very tough for liberals to talk about taxes and argue effectively on the topic.
Yeah.
And just boiling it down to those simple terms sounds like a good idea, but I don't know if it would work in practice.
I think it would be tough in practice, but I like that people are thinking about this stuff on the David Pakman Show subreddit. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, Fox News. Hey, David, do you watch Fox News? Do you ever watch Fox News? Have you been recently? It's complete and utter unhinged madness. Is it even worth your time to point out their bias and delusion? Or do you assume most of your viewers already know this? I have talked about this a little bit. I used to try to catch like 5 or 10 minutes of each cable news channel a day at different times of day just to see what's going on. I basically don't do that anymore because it is impossible at this point to watch Fox News. It's mind-numbingly stupid. And I now realize when people call in and they go, listen, my mom, my dad, my uncle, they've been sucked in by Fox News, and they just have a worldview that doesn't even at all align with what we consider the empirical realities of our planet. And if you just put on 5 minutes of Fox News, it is a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Completely.
And now with Bill O'Reilly gone, with Megyn Kelly gone, with Eric Bolling gone, it's just not the same. I'm not as entertained.
No, it's not. It's watching Greg Gutfeld is not the same as when you used to be able to watch Bill O'Reilly's thinly veiled, racially tinged attacks on non-white Americans, for example. Those were the old days.
I miss those days.
And now you've got to watch Bill O'Reilly sitting in his Long Island home doing interviews with very, very minor online right-wing media entities. It's how far he's fallen. It's sad. And lastly, from our Reddit discussion forum, Pakman's boner on today's show. Yeah, I had a Freudian slip on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, where I was reading a tweet, and I, instead of saying John Boehner, I started to say John Boner.
Yeah.
And a lot of people picked up on it, and someone even developed a funny little comic strip panel and put it on our subreddit. But yeah, a lot of people reacting to my Freudian slip.
One could say that boner just came out of your mouth.
Yes, and Tom Hartman used to not jokingly just call him John Boner. He would just deliberately call him John Boner. It wasn't a Freudian slip. He just thought it was funny to call him John Boner. And maybe I picked that up somehow or something like that. But
Complete
it was
accident.
not deliberate. It was not deliberate. That I can assure you. DavidPakman.com/Reddit. That's where you can sign up. And is someone trying to break down our door?
Yeah, I don't know if that's picking up on
Yeah,
the
I'm
audio.
not sure if the mics picked that up, but sometimes while we're taping, it's just urgent that someone get in here for some reason, and they start trying to break down the door. But we will not relent. We will continue with the David Pakman Show. This is just the best. You might recall, how could you have forgotten already, that in mid-December, Democrat Doug Jones, and Pat, maybe you want to just double-check on that. You can. I'll keep talking.
Okay.
You just double-check what's going on there. Democrat Doug Jones defeated serial accused child sex offender Roy Moore in an Alabama special Senate election to replace Jeff Sessions, who left his seat to become Attorney General for Donald Trump. This was a completely unique situation. A hugely unpopular president in Trump is why the seat is vacant in the first place, since Trump did, after all, select Jeff Sessions to be Attorney General. And normally a Republican would easily win a special election in Alabama. But in the Republican primary, the accused serial child sex offender won. So then you had a Democrat winning the election because the Republican candidate was just an absolute and total disaster. And of course, all along, if instead of special elections to fill Senate vacancies, Alabama simply had the governor appoint an interim senator, none of this would have happened. And that's exactly what Alabama is going to do going forward. This is just so funny. The Alabama House of Representatives has changed the rules, the law, where going forward, there will not be any more special elections in these situations. And instead, the governor is going to appoint someone who can serve up to 2 years until the state has its next regularly scheduled elections. Since more than likely, Alabama is going to keep having Republican governors for a while, this is a good way to prevent the disaster for Republicans that was last year's special election. Democrats were opposed to this rule change. Not surprisingly, Republicans passed it basically along party lines, 67-31, since there are way more Republicans than Democrats in the Alabama House. And Republicans, of course, are saying, oh, this has nothing to do with keeping Republicans in power. It's because these special elections are expensive and we're fiscal conservatives. And that special election cost about $10 million. Democrats aren't convinced. They seem to get what's going on. Congressman John Rogers, who's a Democrat from Birmingham, he called it the anti-Doug Jones bill. I actually don't think this is a terrible idea. I mean, lots of states do this. Instead of having a special election, when you have an unexpected vacancy, an intra-term vacancy, the governor appoints someone, and then at the next regularly scheduled state election, you just have an election, and then you decide who's going to be in that seat. But the doing of this weeks after Doug Jones, a Democrat, won a special election in Alabama, it can't possibly just be a coincidence. It's obviously a reaction to that.
Yeah, I think it's okay, though. I remember in 2013, Chris Christie made a special election in New Jersey for the Senate seat because he just didn't want to be on the same ballot as Cory Booker because he knew that that would hurt him. And it cost the taxpayers there like over $20 million.
Absolutely stunning how much it costs. And I understand. I'm not writing off the fiscal conservatism argument. I'm just saying if they were concerned about that, they could have changed this rule long before a Republican lost, right? Because special elections have existed for a very long time.
Did you see that once it was clear that Roy Moore would have a difficult time winning the election, that the governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, was thinking about pushing it off, and she was consulting with the White House about doing so?
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Not surprising at all, though. What happened? So what we had like someone trying to break down the door.
We got a package.
Oh, we got a package.
Yeah.
It was that urgent that they needed to continually bang on the door.
I pretended to be you. I signed the name and everything.
Oh, okay.
You know
what
got your
it
signature
is?
right.
Something interesting coming?
I didn't open it.
Is it a large package or small? Or?
Pretty big package. Okay. A large package, I would say.
Interesting. I think it's probably envelopes. Was it heavy or light?
It was light.
Yeah. Big package.
But a big package, light. Yep.
It's envelopes. It's bubble mailers, which I ordered. And anyway, very exciting day, as you can tell, at David Pakman Show Studios. Discuss this or any other story, including deliveries during the show, on our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Next, I will talk to Breitbart's C. Edmund Wright. We did not get along well last time he was on the show. Let's see what happens this time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's been many years, but I'm pleased to welcome back to the program C. Edmund Wright, who's a columnist for Breitbart, American Thinker, also author of WTF, How Karl Rove and the Establishment Lost Again. And that, what we talked about last time you were on, I mean, it sort of relates to what we're talking about today, which is Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, Breitbart. First, just very generally, what's your sense of Breitbart's relationship with Trump in the sort of post-Steve Bannon era?
Well, it's interesting. I was reading some comments today on the Breitbart forum, and there was an article, a very critical article of Donald Trump that was posted yesterday on Breitbart, called him Amnesty Don, in fact.
Right.
And I was reading the comments, and there's a lot of anti-Trump comments on there. There's a lot of pro-Trump comments still as well. A lot of people saying, hey, I trust Trump regardless, you know, and then a lot of people calling him out for what appears to be a little bit of a cave on the amnesty issue, or maybe a big cave on the amnesty issue.
You had a blog post where you talked about how your relationship with Steve Bannon became sort of strained when your level of support for Trump, if I understood it correctly, was not up to the standards or demands that Steve Bannon had for what your support should be. Did I get that right? And can you sort of elaborate on that?
You kind of got it right, but not exactly. So I'd like to, clarify. My support of Trump was not up to what the Breitbart readers wanted. And I couldn't fake it, and I wouldn't fake it. My support wasn't up to what Bannon's was or what Matt Boyle's was. That said, they still, liked me as an anti-establishment writer, being able to narrow in on the Republican Party establishment and their problems. But, having in some sort of standoffish feelings about Trump was just not something anyone at Breitbart, as far as the readership, really wanted. So I just kind of backed away a little bit.
And what was keeping you from being as exuberant about Trump as maybe others wanted you to be?
He's really not a conservative. I would have preferred more someone like Ted Cruz, who's more solid conservative, or maybe even Scott Walker, who had shown some success fighting the liberal establishment in Wisconsin. So Trump was not my favorite, nor was he at the bottom of the list. I certainly preferred him over Jeb Bush, for example, over John Kasich, for example. And, quite frankly, Trump is governed a lot more conservatively than he campaigned. He's governed a lot more conservatively than he's taught, for the last 30 or 40 years.
That's interesting. So let me go back just a couple sentences. So you preferred Trump over Jeb Bush, for example. On policy, what policy of Trump's did you like better than Jeb Bush's as a conservative, again?
First of all, it wasn't really on policy per se.
Oh.
Jeb is a moderate. He's a typical Republican establishment moderate.
Yep.
And keep in mind, a lot of Trump supporters think Trump ended Jeb Bush. That's not really true. Jeb was never going anywhere. The only people who thought Jeb Bush for president in 2016 was a good idea, were like 20 commentators in Washington, D.C. No one outside that. There's more of an aversion for family political dynasties, and the Bushes pushed it with having two of them. There was no way the Republican primary electorate was going to put a third Bush up there. But Jeb Bush he's not confrontational enough. In fact, in 2011, I wrote an article where I said Trump's willingness to confront would actually be a very valuable lesson for the Republican Party.
That's interesting. So if I'm understanding you correctly, it wasn't that Trump's policy appealed to you, because like you said, you're a conservative and Trump's not really a conservative. It wasn't his policy that appealed to you more than Jeb Bush. It was that he would confront other people?
Right. He would fight. And again, it just goes back, and I wrote something back in 2011 I called Translating Trump, and it was based on an interview with the Rush Limbaugh show, where Trump went hard after Obama, went hard after the Democrats. And I thought, okay, this is what we need to do. Mitt Romney would not do that. Jeb Bush certainly wouldn't do that. So what my perfect candidate would have been Donald Trump's attitude, maybe toned down 20%, and maybe Ted Cruz's philosophy.
Wow. Now that's something to, that's the stuff of dreams or nightmares, I guess, depending on which side of the aisle you're on.
My dream, your nightmare, right?
What do you see as the future of Breitbart now that there has been sort of a split, but at the same time, a lot of the Breitbart readership, it seems like the Breitbart readership is in a sense confused or maybe split significantly because of what's taken place with Bannon, Breitbart, and Trump. What do you think the future of Breitbart will be as a publication and what's left of Trump's presidency?
Well, boy, that's a tough one. I guess if I could answer that, I could go to Alexander Marlowe and say, look, I'm worth a bunch of money to you. I think a lot of it's going to depend on how Trump's presidency unfolds. It'll be very interesting, for example, to see how this latest thing with DACA and the Dreamers and maybe path to citizenship and maybe not unfolds. There was kind of a assumption during the primary by a lot of hardcore pro-Trump early adopting voters that he was the most hardcore, the most consistently hardcore on issues like deportation, what have you. And that was really never the case. He was all over the board on that issue. Sure. He was pretty firm on the border. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the reality of Trump unfolds versus maybe the projection of Trump that I think a lot of the hardcore voters, really bought into.
Yeah, you mentioned DACA. I mean, I'm curious, how do you think Trump handled the recent, I don't even know what to call it, situation around DACA and negotiations on the government shutdown?
Well, Trump, I think there's competing forces inside Trump, and I don't mean that to be negative necessarily. I think on the one hand, you have the Stephen Miller hardline tie to his hardest core base. And then on the other hand, you have a guy who, he doesn't really, when you get right down to it, unless you've personally offended him, he doesn't want to upset you. So, and he likes to make a deal. So I think there's going to be some tension within not only the Trump administration, but maybe in Trump's heart and mind as well, where he goes with this.
Did you get the sense, like I did, that Trump was almost like confused as to why there even was a shutdown, in the sense that, you know, he had put out a couple different ways that he thought it could be averted. He said, hey, get me a clean DACA bill, and I'd be willing to do that. But then that sort of evaporated. At another point, he said, if I get anything bipartisan on paper, I'll sign it. But then he didn't do that. Like, I was getting the sense that he almost was kind of confused as to why there even was a shutdown.
You know, I don't know about confused. I think there's a lot of confusion about shutdowns in Washington and across 350 million people. Yeah, I come from the conservative wing of the party that, hey, a shutdown's not a bad thing necessarily. I also think that when you go back and look at what's called the Ted Cruz shutdown in 2013, all the Republicans were complaining that was going to kill them in the 2014 midterms. Yeah. Actually, it came back to be a net positive in that.
How do you figure?
All of that is the politics of a shutdown are very confusing. I would only say that Trump never claimed to be an expert on the civics of how our government ran. That was part of his appeal to a lot of people. So I would just maybe chalk it up to some of that. He just wants to get things done, and I think the movement of Washington frustrates him.
Who do you think is to blame for this most recent shutdown?
Well, again, I might say credit instead of blame. You know, I think Chuck Schumer sort of played the part this time that Ted Cruz played in 2013 without the filibuster. You know, but what I think is interesting is you and I may never agree on who's to blame per se, but the Republicans are not losing this in a PR standpoint nearly to the extent they generally have in the past.
Well, I mean, I'm a little, I'm not, you and I might not agree, but I'm not sure you're agreeing with what you've said in the past, because when we interviewed you back in October of 2013, you talked about the shutdown, and you said, as far as that shutdown, you said, quote, obviously, I think with the Democrats controlling the White House and the Senate, it obviously can't be a Republican shutdown. So by that same standard that you sort of gave me in October of 2013, this can't be Schumer's fault, right?
Yes and no.
Oh.
The problem is, if you get into the nuts and bolts of who caused the shutdown and you have to go through arcane Senate rules,
right?
That's one thing. Who is at fault is it ultimately who gets the blame for it, rightly or wrongly. I have just kind of, you know, accepted that the truth of who's really at the bottom of a shutdown is never going to be important. Only thing that's important is what the perception is.
On that, actually, we agree. Surprisingly, I've said before that I believe that these shutdowns, particularly because most elements of the government actually do keep running, I believe that it's a political football that you can either benefit from or be hurt by. I question how much people actually vote based on their perception of who is to blame for a shutdown. But I actually believe that it's effectively almost 100% a perception issue. And it sounds like you agree.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think there's other variables, too. You know, I think most Republican voters agreed with Ted Cruz on his stance on Obamacare, and that's why eventually it helped the Republicans. I'm not sure the Democrats want to go that far for DACA the way Schumer did. I mean, I guess we'll see in the 2018 primaries and then into the 2018 general midterms.
When it comes to those midterms, what do you see as the voting issues that will determine not only how people vote, but the level of enthusiasm and what turnout will be? Because in these midterms, traditionally, the party that holds the White House loses seats in the House and or Senate. It didn't happen in 2002 for George W. Bush, and I think we have being in a very recently post 9/11 moment to sort of look at as to why that was sort of an outlier. But what do you think will sort of dictate how the 2018 midterms go?
Boy, a lot there. I'd like to comment real quickly. First, the 2002 midterms were probably directly a result of the Paul Wellstone Memorial, when Tom Harkin hijacked that thing and it became an embarrassment. That was just enough to move the needle, is my theory. I think right now it's way too early to judge the 2018 midterms.
Really?
I think this latest government shutdown thing, kind of being pinned on as the Schumer shutdown, seemed to move the needle on the generic congressional ballot. But I think 9 months from now, the biggest thing the Republicans have going for them is 9 months of increased take-home pay as a result of tax reform. That's where they're going to have to hang their hat to counter the dynamic you mentioned, which is true. Normally, the first midterm after a new president is a reaction to that.
Well, what about an issue like, I had a caller recently who was a big Trump supporter who said, for me, the wall is the issue. And he initially said, if there's no progress on that wall by 2020, I might not vote for reelection for Donald Trump. Is that an issue which at this point seems almost laughable, that we're going to have a Mexican paid for wall in progress by 9 months from now? Do you think that will be a voting issue for Republicans?
Not so much in 2018, because Trump's not on the ballot and nobody is tied to the issue of the wall the way Trump is.
Yeah.
Just like that. But yes, I mean, I think Trump could definitely lose some support over the wall if there's not some sort of progress made on it, or at least the perception of progress.
Now, speaking very candidly with me, Edmund, as you said, you are a conservative. Trump is not a conservative, and that was the source of some of your hesitations in terms of your support for Trump. When you hear Trump during the campaign say something like, I'm going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it, aside from whether you like that idea or dislike that idea, do you believe that Trump truly thinks that's something he's going to do, or do you recognize it as relatively far-fetched?
I think it's far-fetched, but I do think that he's very insistent on securing the border, whatever combination of wall, fence, virtual fence, drone, or maybe patrol boats on Falcon Lake, for example. It's a long, complex border geographically. I think he's very serious about securing the border. I think the wall just kind of became a shorthand version for that. I do think a lot of people bought into it more literally than maybe Trump ever meant, and I think he played to that at the rallies. But I think Trump understands that the wall is going to be a combination of different things, just from a logistical, practical standpoint.
Now, from a national security standpoint, of course, the reality is that most people who are here in the U.S. Under what we would call illegal circumstances did not physically cross the U.S.-Mexico border, right? So do you think Trump knows that? And more importantly, do you think he cares? Because it's much less appealing to talk about, we will target visa overstayers. That doesn't have the same cachet as talking about building a wall.
Yeah. Okay. Again, you get down to what the reality of our politics, David, is that
yes,
perception often trumps reality.
Right.
Again, I think Trump has a vision for a secure border and a sovereign state. I don't think he's that interested in the details of how he gets there. And again, that's not a negative or a positive comment. That's just kind of the way he's always managed. He's always been the big picture guy.
Yeah. And
he's always had people do the details. And with the exception of trade, where I think maybe he gets a little too involved, I think that's the way he's going to run the border security situation and immigration as well.
Who could have predicted that the election of Donald Trump would have me seeing eye to eye with you, Edmund? Just 5 years after we had basically no agreements whatsoever in our first interview. It's really quite a unique experience, the world of Trump, isn't it?
Yeah, the Trump movement, and I separate Trump from the Trump movement. I actually have a lot more problems with some of the Trump hardcore supporters than I ever did or ever do with Donald Trump himself.
Attaboy.
The Trump movement divided the Republican Party not just in base versus establishment, which is a little nuance that Rush Limbaugh hadn't figured out yet. It also divided the base into two parties. It really cut the Republican, conservative, libertarian, non-Democrat base, if you will, whatever that universe is.
Yep.
It really cut it into four pieces, and we have a lot of confusing cross currents as a result.
Well, at least he's pro-life, right? As of being 69 years old, he became pro-life, and that actually, I think, did carry a lot of weight with some important groups that helped elect him.
I would agree with that. I think they were perhaps remarkably uncurious about some other things, but yes, I would agree with your assessment of that. And he came down kind of where I wanted him to come down, so I understand what you're saying. I'm just not going to complain about that per se.
All right, C. Edmund Wright, columnist for Breitbart and for American Thinker. Great to catch up with you after all these years.
All right, David, let's do it again.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So about 5 or 6 weeks ago on December 15th, it was 2 days after Democrat Doug Jones defeated Republican Roy Moore in that Alabama special Senate election, I did a story that we called Democrats Should Target Ted Cruz in 2018. Cruz, as I've mentioned, is one of the most vile Republican senators in the United States. There's that angle. There's the angle of these sort of demographic shifts that are taking place in Texas, and there's a number of movements that are trying to turn Texas blue. A lot of interesting reasons to maybe look at 2018 as a good year to target someone like Ted Cruz, who is running a Senate reelection campaign. And there's a new poll, and it's admittedly a Democratic poll, which has incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz leading the Democratic sort of front runner. It hasn't been a primary yet, but the Democratic front runner to face Ted Cruz is Beto O'Rouke by only 10 points. According to this poll, in Texas, with 18% of the electorate undecided, Cruz is ahead by only 8 points, 45 to 37. Now, again, it's a Democratic poll from a group called End Citizens United, which is a campaign reform group. There's a contrasting poll. It's an internal one from Ted Cruz's campaign. And usually these internal polls are the most favorable to the candidate. Remember, back in the 2012 presidential election, Mitt Romney, we learned, was totally shocked by losing to Barack Obama on election night because he was heavily focused on these internal polls that his own campaign was doing, and they did not reflect reality. So there's an internal Ted Cruz poll that has Cruz ahead by 18 points. So the Democratic poll has Cruz ahead by 8. The Ted Cruz poll has Cruz ahead by 18. That's a 10-point swing from one poll to the other. So what can we be sure of? We can be sure that this is an uphill battle. It's not going to be like the Alabama special election. This is not a special election, first and foremost. And unlike in Alabama, the Ted Cruz's candidacy is not the candidacy of an accused serial child sex assaulter, right? Whatever Ted Cruz has in his background, it's at least not public. So it's a very, very different situation. It has been 30 years since 1988. And that's the last time that a Democrat won a Senate election in Texas. And Cruz has been in this seat since 2012. But it's not impossible, right? If Ted Cruz has some kind of scandal hit in the next few months, anything could happen. So I think this is an interesting race.
Yeah, maybe if he starts liking more porn videos, more voters in Texas will turn against him.
Yes, or you mean being hacked on
right.
Twitter.
There was a staffer or something?
Yeah, that's the official story. What can you do? Well, you could donate to Beto O'Rouke. Actor and David Pakman Show fan John Leguizamo announced that he has been donating daily, $25 a day, to Beto O'Rouke. You can get involved in the campaign if you're in Texas, or even if you're not. Eventually you would be able to phone bank after the primary, but you've got to vote, right? And to participate in the primary in Texas, you need to register by February 5th. That's coming up. The primary is March 6th. And then to vote in the November election, you have to register by October 9th. So still plenty of time for that. I don't want to pretend that this is some easy seat to turn from red to blue, but the significance, if it were to happen, would be monumental. And if we believe the Democratic poll, where Beto O'Rouke is down 8 points, let's call it down 10 points to be more conservative, 9 months to go. That means he needs to make up about 1 point per month. It's not impossible, but you've got to start working on it now.
And it's a U.S. Senate seat, so that's important in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it would also mean the end of Ted Cruz's political career.
Oh, it'd be huge in many ways.
And that's a big deal.
It counts as a Democrat in Texas. It counts as one of the 100 Senate votes in the Senate. And just getting rid of Ted Cruz is absolutely fantastic. It's something we should all aspire to. And Beto O'Rouke also has the right positions on many issues, right? He would be an asset in the Senate, pro-choice, wants stimulus spending, wants more science teachers in school and funding for them. He's strong on the climate. He wants citizens automatically registered to vote and to end voter ID, aka voter suppression laws. Point of it is, this is one of many interesting races that you can get involved in. All 435 members of the House are up for re-election. 1/3 of the 100 senators are up for re-election. So please get involved. That's the main message from me. Donald Trump has imposed a new tax on solar panels that are imported from other countries. Solar panels, a technology that's great for the environment. It's great for American jobs, even if the panels themselves are from other countries. And Donald Trump is imposing a 30% tax. I've told you this before. Trump, for a while, has had the exact wrong positions on energy, right? He wants to resuscitate a dying industry of coal mining, which employs now, I think we said, fewer people than the fast food chain Arby's, fewer people, I think, than JCPenney as well. Didn't you tell me that, Pat? And per market conditions, the coal industry is an industry that should be allowed to die. Instead, Donald Trump has put taxes on solar panels, which is an industry that has the potential to create way more jobs in the future. And I know that this is also really arousing, for lack of a better term, to the fossil fuel industry at large, because anything that slows down the solar industry is good for fossil fuels. Now, because Trump is only putting the tax on imported solar panels, he's saying this is going to be very good for domestically produced solar panels. But like with most of these issues, it's way more complicated and nuanced than Donald Trump is making it out to be. It's true that there are a few American solar panel manufacturers that have filed complaints over cheap imported solar panels from different parts of Asia. The problem is that the solar panel manufacturing is a small part of what we would call the American solar industry. There's the installers, there's the drivers, customer service, salespeople. It's a long list of jobs that are supported by the solar industry, regardless of where the panels actually come from. But that's only one part. The other problem is that the two companies that filed complaints to begin with, that led to this, manufacture their solar panels in the United States, but they're foreign companies. The two companies are Suniva and SolarWorld, and they're Chinese and German, respectively. So which it is much more muddy of an issue than, hey, these two American solar panel companies are getting crushed, let's help them with the tax. And the big winner is coal. This tariff is expected to block about 7.5 gigawatts of solar capacity from being installed over the next 4 years. That energy has to come from somewhere else, and it's going to be pushed over to the fossil fuel industry, including coal. And for claiming to be the party of the free market and letting supply and demand decide, taxing solar panels is sort of the opposite of allowing the invisible hand of supply and demand to run its course. The tax is also going to cost 23,000 jobs in places like Texas and Florida and South Carolina. Red states that voted for Donald Trump, again, because there's so many ancillary industries that rely on having solar panels to install. It's terrible. And it's the exact opposite of what supposedly Donald Trump's overarching philosophy is, which is one of being sort of a free market supply and demand guy, even though we know that with the right, it's only the free market, it's only the invisible hand, it's only supply and demand when it benefits the industries they want to prop up. And otherwise, they're all about government intervention. So a horrible move by Donald Trump on an issue he claims to know a lot about, but really just doesn't. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to this voicemail that came in today.
Hi, David. This is the Antelope calling in. I just had a quick thought. Was just wondering what you think the lasting impacts of the constant, well, really you can just call them lies, that have really been emboldened by this administration, and what you think that will mean for the future, even after Trump is gone, whether it be 2020 or 2024.
Yep.
Thanks.
I've talked a little bit about this generally, but I believe that the Donald Trump presidency will not only open up the door potentially to even more outrageously unqualified and incompetent people to be elected at different levels of government, but the normalization of a total lack of diplomacy, decorum, and sort of a respectful way of carrying forward political business is a huge liability for the United States on the world stage. So the lying is part of it. The lying is part of it, the making fun of people of different races, people with physical disability. It's all horrible in terms of the normalization that exists. And I am genuinely concerned about the lying aspect of it and much more, because it has lowered the bar so significantly about what is even expected from our elected officials.
I just wonder if future presidents will be able to get away with the lies that Trump has been able to get away with. I mean, there is this whole idea of Don being Teflon Don.
Yeah.
And I think that applies.
It does, and I think you might be right that other people might not get away with this degree of lying, but it's still normalizing the bigger picture of, yeah, listen, you got to read between the lines, and it's okay that he's promising things that not only does he not understand, he doesn't even really have an intention of doing. It's all being normalized, and it is incredibly dangerous. We've got a great bonus show for you today. No time to tell you about it, but you can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership or patreon.com/davidpakmanshow. The bonus show happens every day, and it is now world famous and available to both members and patrons, and we'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.